shocking new Dr. Phil, the 8-year-old boy who reportedly confessed to gunning down his own dad. This is appalling. What's going on? What's behind this? Now, hear the chilling interrogation tape and why he says he did it. Plus, should this child be prosecuted?
Absolutely.
Well, you're completely wrong about that.
He's got a problem.
Stand by, Dr. Phil.
Some say it's a hard life, but it's hard for us all. Always hold on.
In 10,
Always be strong. Reach out.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Stand by, camera 6. Go, Dr. Phil.
Thank you. There are some shocking stories in the news right now that have people riveted, and I keep getting asked, Dr. Phil, what is your take on this stuff? Well, my take is I think we must be going crazy in this world. I just don't get some of this. I know I'm supposed to, but some of it, it just turns my stomach. How could an 8-year-old boy allegedly kill his own father? What would make a man brutally murder an anchor woman he apparently doesn't even know? And what on earth was going on with these people that allegedly chain a teenage boy in the fireplace, hold him captive, and torture him? Now, these are some of the stories that we're going to be delving into today. Now, first, a boy looking terrified, wearing only boxer shorts covered in feces, soot, and urine, shows up at a fitness club with a chain locked to his ankle, saying, "Don't let them get me, don't let them get me."
The teen in chains, possibly naked, stumbled into a gym in Tracy claiming he'd been abducted and had just escaped.
He was naked and covered in bruises.
He looked like he was emaciated.
He just had a very terrified look in his eye, and he kept saying, "They're coming for me."
2 adults allegedly used a baseball bat, a belt, and a knife to beat and torture a 16-year-old boy.
Police say that 16-year-old was held captive in that couple's home in Tracy for nearly a year.
From torture to aggravated mayhem to false imprisonment to corporal injury, inflicting great bodily injury.
The Tracy couple, accused of chaining a teenager in their home against his will, walked into court today in chains of their own. The prosecutors added 8 additional charges against Michael Schumacher and Kelly Lau that could send both of them to prison for the rest of their lives.
Well, police also arrested Karen Ramirez, a family friend who the boy called his aunt. Now, they were apparently living with the couple for more than a year. Days later, the couple's neighbor, 29-year-old Anthony Waiters, was also arrested. Now, according to a jailhouse interview with one of the suspects, the teen would sit chained in the living room and watch while the family, including 4 of the suspect's children, ate meals in the kitchen. Now, joining me via satellite to discuss this gruesome story is Nancy Grace of Headline News. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Phil.
This is appalling. You've been following this. I know. I know you spent 10 years as a prosecutor. Is this just over-the-top appalling to you?
Dr. Phil, let me say, if these allegations are true, if they are convicted, may they rot in hell. I just found out the 29-year-old neighbor, Anthony Waiters, works for the Bay East Association of Realtors. And Dr. Phil, he is actually the Tracy Cougars youth football team coach. All of these people were posing as normal adults when in fact the boy, who many people thought was just 12 years old, he was so emaciated, actually had indentations on his ankles where they had shackled him, keeping him in a lethargic state with marijuana, alcohol pills, beating him in the head. They are facing charges that could land them behind bars for life.
Well, we're talking about they beat and burned him with a bat, they beat him with a belt, They cut him, blindfolded him, trapped him in the fireplace, and wouldn't feed him. And what gets me about this, and Nancy, I'm wondering what the prosecutors will do with this, because you have not one, not two, not three, but 4 people that are involved in this. Is there never a time when somebody says, hey, we shouldn't be doing this? Is there not one shred of morality in one of those 4 people? What will a prosecutor do with these folks?
Well, first of all, the prosecutor may get one of them to turn on the others. I wouldn't do that. I'd put them all on trial together and let them stew in the same pot. Because believe you me, Dr. Phil, when they get to trial, it'll be this. They'll all be blaming the other, trying to put all the guilt probably on one of the 4. But long story short, they were all hiding in plain sight. I also fault the system. Ramirez was going in and out of the home. Neighbors saw the boy out in the yard. He wasn't in school. Why didn't somebody wave a flag of alarm and contact authorities? Everybody let this boy down.
But Nancy, somebody did, and that's what really bothers me. And I know all of these things that were allegedly done to this boy were not something that were strictly behind closed doors, because teachers report that they had seen problems. I mean, these are things that weren't just in a vacuum. And apparently the older brother is now going to try and get custody of this child to give him some protection. But did the system fail them here?
You know what, Dr. Phil, and I know you've seen this in your practice, where everybody just stands by and let something horrendous happen. And in my mind, the people that stand by and let a child be abused and don't even ask the question what's going on are just as guilty as those who did it. Again, 4 people facing multiple charges and looking at life behind bars. This boy was covered in cuts, bruises, and soot from being held in the fireplace in shackles. And when they did the search of the home in the garage, Dr. Phil, police allegedly found nylon tie downs in the garage and chains used to chain the boy up.
Well, this is just, I mean, this is why I say it's hard for me to even get my mind around this, because in 2002, teachers report to the local affiliate there that they called CPS about this, but the boys were not removed until 2007, and then yet this still happens even after that. Now,
Dr. Phil, don't get me started on CPS, Child Protective Services. This child had been taken away from the so-called aunt, Ramirez. She's the one with the earring stuck in her eye. They leave. Nobody can find them, allegedly. And here she is going in and out of the home in plain sight, 50 feet from this upscale gym, the In-Shape City Gym. Leah Leonardo was working there. I spoke to her, and she said she was stunned, scared to death when what she thought was a little boy came in limping, begging for help.
Well, the boy says that he overheard these people, and I know this is all alleged. This is going to be determined, I guess, as this goes out.
Yeah, blah.
But the boy says that, I know, but the boy says that he overheard them talking about how they were planning to kill him, that they were going to cut him up, put him in the aqueduct, or they were going to inject air bubbles into his neck. So, I mean, this child has been traumatized, and I guess the message is we all have to pay attention. As Nancy says, they're hiding in plain sight. If we see something, you are better off to call authorities and be wrong than to not call authorities when you are right. So we have to be willing to do that. Now, we could talk about this all day, but another shocking headline involving a child. It's the story of an 8-year-old boy who was arrested for allegedly killing 2 men, including his own father. This is a 3rd grader who should have been playing basketball, having fun with his friends in the backyard, but instead, he was in a police interrogation room describing the unimaginable.
St. John, Arizona, the scene of a double murder.
It is an astonishing interrogation. Police questioning an 8-year-old boy whom they suspect shot his father and another man in cold blood.
It starts with denial.
I think I shot at the car.
The boy explains it's because he fired at an intruder fleeing the scene. In fact, the third grader, now accused of killing his 29-year-old father, Vincent Romero, and his father's roommate, 39-year-old Tim Romans, goes even further, saying he found the men already shot and stepped in to put them out of their misery.
I think I shot my dad because he was suffering, I think. I didn't want him to suffer. And then I got the gun, and then I fired it at my dad. Twice.
Did your dad say anything to you when you were doing that?
No.
Police begin fishing for a motive, and the boy says his father had recently disciplined him.
He is in a juvenile detention center right now, still facing the possibility of being tried as an adult.
Well, let's listen in more detail to the interrogation with that little voice describing such a horrific act. When he was initially interviewed by police, the 8-year-old blamed murders on what he called some bad people.
What were you thinking when you shot Tim Romans?
I was thinking, what in the heck is going on? It sounds like...
Who did you think might have done that at that time?
I don't know, someone bad though.
Someone bad?
There's some people down the street that are pretty bad people, always smoking and driving pretty fast down the road in a blue car.
Well, after a while, the boy's story changed, and he confessed to shooting both his father and his father's roommate.
So it's real important that you tell us what happened yesterday. I think you know a little more than you're telling.
I got out of the bathroom and I went upstairs and I saw my dad. And then I think I grabbed the gun at that time and I shot him twice. And after I shot him the one time, he was still moving. So I think I shot him again. But I went downstairs and I still had the gun and I reloaded just in case. And then I shot him and then I shot him. And then I reloaded in case the guy would come back. So then I think I heard a car coming, so I looked around and I accidentally shot him maybe. And that's when they fired at him twice.
That's him?
Yeah.
So you were mad at your dad, that's when you shot him?
Well, the first time I was mad at him, but he already was shot. So then I shot him again.
Well, up next, only 1.5% of all murders are patricides, killing one's own father. This is extremely rare. So why would an 8-year-old boy allegedly kill his dad? And were there any warning signs?
Who hit you?
My mom.
And what about your dad?
She was the one that told us to.
So how often do you get in trouble?
Most of the time.
Well, today we're talking about headline horror stories because I get so many of you saying, Dr. Phil, everybody reports this, but what's going on? What's behind this? We're talking right now about the case of an 8-year-old Arizona boy who's been charged with double homicide, including the alleged shooting death of his own father. Now, details are sketchy, but in a police interview, the boy says he was mad at his dad.
Did you get in trouble for anything recently?
Yeah, I think so.
Did you get in trouble?
I'm supposed to bring papers home, and I'm supposed to bring papers that say I did and I didn't. So but then they hit me.
Who hit you?
My mom.
And what about your dad?
She was the one that told us to.
So how often do you get in trouble?
Most of the time.
For what kind of stuff? But you told the truth right now, didn't you?
100%.
Well, some wonder whether there could have been abuse in this situation, but would that count as a defense for killing a parent? Now, joining me to weigh in on the issue are Nancy Grace of Headline News, criminologist Dr. Denise Boots from the University of Texas at Dallas, and attorney Paul Mones, who specializes in defending children who are accused of killing their parents. So, everybody, welcome. Nancy, let me ask you first, as a former prosecutor, should this child be prosecuted?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think the child should be prosecuted only in the sense of being handled in juvenile court. So, over the years, the justice system can make sure that he is in treatment. I do not believe an 8-year-old boy should go to jail.
Okay, but you do think that if he was prosecuted, he would have a better chance of being monitored and getting help than if he was just left out on the street?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. And not to speak ill of the dead, Dr. Phil, but who gives an 8-year-old boy a .22 caliber weapon and access to ammo? That's my big question today.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that as well. Now, Dr. Boots, let me ask you something. What causes, you study these things and you do really good longitudinal looks at these things. What causes an 8-year-old to do this? I mean, as Nancy says, obviously there has to be a gun and ammo available, but what kind of kids aggress in this way?
Well, this is an exceptional offender, and he's exceptionally young, which is extremely rare on its face. We don't normally see youngsters this age committing these types of acts. And when we look at young offenders that commit parricide, typically risk factors that emerge are things like the availability of guns in the house. Very frequently, we see severe abuse going on in the family. A child who has tried to get help but has failed to receive help from others, or they have entertained thoughts of suicide, or they have other types of mental health problems or depression.
There was something in the court record that said this child had been spanked 1,000 times. He reported being spanked 1,000 times. When I was 8, I didn't even know the number 1,000.
I had that same thought. Yeah,
but,
that's
I mean,
extreme.
You know, this kid has been, at least reports, being spanked a lot. Paul, is this a defense? I mean, if you get into a court situation, would you use this abuse as a defense?
Well, you know, I'm not going to comment on this 8-year-old per se, but I've done hundreds of cases over the last 25 years, and typically it is really, really, really rare for a kid under the age of 13 or 14 to kill a parent without the presence of abuse. And, I mean, I disagree with Nancy to the extent that I don't think the juvenile justice system is the place for these kids. I think really where these kids need to be is in the dependency system, especially if there's any history of abuse in a kid's life. The kid really needs treatment. I mean, he's 8 years old. I mean, we're talking about a kid who at 8 years old, a third grader, is just learning some basic life skills. If you remember, and the fact that the kid gave a confession or whatever he said to me was, it was crazy to the extent that an 8-year-old can be made by an adult figure to say almost anything. I can convince an 8-year-old kid that he doesn't live on the street that he lives in if I ask the questions in a certain way. And I think that we need first to look at the fact that the kid is 8, but secondly that, you know, parricides that happen in the United States are so rare. When they do happen, it's typically because there's some real dysfunction in the family.
So, Nancy, how many red lights did they run on this interrogation?
Well, they ran quite a few. They interrogated the boy without a lawyer or without his parents. Apparently his father dead and stepmother not there. Obviously the biological mother not there as well to allow the questioning to go on. But you can lead a suspect, you can trick a suspect, even if they're 8, to give a confession. I do not believe this is a false confession if that's what your defense attorney is suggesting. And as far as getting treatment in the future, you cannot ensure treatment over the years to come unless the boy is under court supervision. That can only happen if there's a guilty plea or some type. I do not think the boy needs to go to jail, but he obviously needs help.
Right, but if you put him in the juvenile justice system, you're going to put him with kids who have experience in delinquency. You're going to put him with kids who have... Well, you're completely wrong about that. I'm sorry. You're completely wrong about that.
Not on probation. That's not true.
Well, he will be still in contact with people in the system. It's much better... Well, you can say that. It's very nice for a lawyer to say... But I mean, give me a break.
If he's on probation, he is not in juvenile detention, sir. He is with a family, hopefully relatives.
Well, that's really hopeful if he's going to be with a family. I mean, you want to ensure that he's going to get treatment. I think that's the thing. Maybe we agree with that, Nancy.
But I think a lot of people are curious about this, about what happens to this kid now, because obviously this wasn't a stellar situation. I mean, if in fact the child is being spanked excessively, and we don't know what the truth is
Phil,
here.
The thing is that child abuse is the perfect crime. Why is it the perfect crime? And you mentioned this earlier. It's that it silences the victims and the people who watch it happen, and I'm sure Nancy's probably seen this in her work as a prosecutor. people know what's going on in the family, but people just don't say anything. People are much more willing to say something about a dog being beaten in a yard than a kid being in a yard with bruises on him. You look at all of how America became up in arms over Michael Vick. You never see that kind of reaction to people when kids are mistreated this way. Never. And the reason is that we still think that people should, having kids, it's your own business, and a neighbor shouldn't get involved. And that's a tragedy.
Well, Nancy, what do you say to that? I mean, I don't understand. I'm not sure I even understand what y'all's distinction is. Nancy, you're saying if he's on probation, he's not going to be dumped in a juvenile detention center with a bunch of more hardened juveniles, and that makes sense to me. Well, I think what we're trying to do is build a fence around here, and I think what Nancy's saying is you got to make sure this kid gets help along the way.
Oh, I completely agree with her, and I think that we're just differing on what kind of help is, because if this kid does something wrong in the future and you have a system that's looking out pretty hard at him, then he'll go into detention. Whereas if you have him in a juvenile, in a dependency neglect system, he'll still be overseen by the court until he's 18 years old.
And additionally, when you have a youth that goes into the criminal justice system, there's a labeling process that occurs. And I agree with Paul in the sense that when you have an 8-year-old that is having to meet with a probation officer on a weekly basis, or whatever the terms of the conditions of probation are, they start to internalize the fact that they are a bad kid, or they're a problem kid, they're a criminal kid. And
his father, he's got a problem,
He's also 8 years old, and he needs some help. And the question becomes, we've already failed this kid once as a society. Do we want to keep punishing him, or do we want to get him the help that he needs so that he can get through this and
you guys
move to the
can
next
twist
stage
my
of his
words
life?
all you want. I said at the get-go, this child does not need to go into juvie jail where he can learn even more bad habits. What he needs is help. That is what I'm after. This boy, even in his confession to police, says, yeah, there are bad people down the street. They smoke and they drive fast. Clearly does not comprehend what he has done. He needs help desperately, Dr. Phil.
We're on the same page.
All right, coming up, what happened to another young child after he falsely confessed to a murder he didn't commit? Wait until you hear his story, and I'm going to ask Nancy if she thinks this child is capable of standing trial, whatever the outcome. We'll be right back.
I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole until age 65. In prison, it was an awful place. I mean, just fights, riots. It was horrible.
An estimated 200,000 kids are tried, sentenced, or incarcerated as adults every year in the U.S. But what happens when a child lies during a police interrogation, not lies to deny, but falsely confesses to a murder he didn't commit? Now, Tyler was a 13-year-old honor student in Mississippi with no history of violence. So it was a complete shock to his small community when Tyler was arrested and charged with the murder of his sister's husband in May 2003. He spent 6 years in adult prison before he was discovered as innocent and released. Take a look.
My half-sister killed her ex-husband and wanted me to take the blame for it because I was 13 and she told me that I would get a slap on the wrist. I did it because she was my sister and I loved her. I was convicted and I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole until age 65. In prison, it was an awful place. I mean, just fights, riots. It was horrible. I got out of prison by winning an appeal and having my conviction overturned by the state Supreme Court.
My God.
The truth finally came out. I'm so glad this is over. This has been a long, hard road.
We felt the jury would do the right thing.
People ought to really realize that our system is very fallible, that there are people that are innocent that are in prison.
My sister is currently on death row for the murder of her husband. I love her because she's still my sister, but I don't want to have anything to do with her.
Well, we're talking about horrific headlines here, and that is a horrific one. Tyler, you went in with the idea of confessing when you went in there, right? You had already made the deal with your sister?
Yes.
So you just walked in and said you did it?
No, at first I went in and just like the 8-year-old in Arizona, I denied having anything to do with it. My mother was in the room with me initially, and then they took her out of the room with me and wouldn't let her back into the room with me, and then that's when I falsely confessed.
All right, but did you do it on purpose, or were you coerced into it?
To confess?
Yes.
I was coerced by my sister.
By your sister, but not by the police?
No, not by the police.
All right. At the time you confessed, you thought you're just going to go get some easy time for a short period of time and then you'll be back on the street?
I honestly believed, is what my sister told me, that nothing would happen to me because I was 13.
Yeah. So then you wound up life without parole?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At what point did you say, whoa, wait a minute, I now want to tell the truth?
I sat in jail about 3 days trying to get in contact. As soon as I realized that she was lying, and when I was arrested, I knew that I had to go back and tell the truth. So I started sending notes out to the sheriff's deputies, and at that time I had a court-appointed attorney, and she wouldn't come to the jail, and the sheriff refused to talk to me without a lawyer. So I started sending notes, and they finally decided to talk to me without having an attorney present.
Nancy, how does this happen? I mean, do they just, he confesses, so they say, fine, case closed, and move on? How does this happen from a prosecutor's standpoint?
Well, before we pin it on the cops and police as being the bad guys, let's talk about the real culprit, that being the sister. May she also rot in hell. Long story short, Tyler Edmonds knew the day of the shooting who did the shooting. He knew he did not do the shooting. And when everybody, the family, the sister, all agree the boy did the shooting, why are cops what are they, clairvoyant? They're supposed to guess the boy is lying? It wasn't until much later he said, I was lying. Then the case has to be reopened and reinvestigated. Yes, it's a travesty that he went behind bars at that tender age, especially being innocent, but the fault is on the sister.
Nancy, is an 8-year-old capable of standing trial? He was 13. He went through the process, got convicted. You say an 8-year-old is capable of standing trial?
An 8-year-old is competent under the law to stand trial. But just because they're 8 years old does not mean they don't understand what's going on. They can't load a .22 caliber weapon and shoot it. He understands what's going on, which is the meaning of competence. Are you able to assist your attorney at trial? Just because he's competent doesn't mean in our jurisprudence system he should go to trial just because he understands what's happening.
There's no way an 8-year-old can competently. Most adults can't even effectively assist their lawyer at trial, let alone an 8-year-old. I mean, I believe that, you know, your idea, Nancy, that people should have compassion for this 8-year-old and he should be treated as the right way. But there's no. I've represented a 10-year-old boy who killed another kid in an accidental shooting. And in that particular situation, the kid didn't even know what the legal system was. He had an idea from television that there were cops and they were good and that jail was bad, but that's about it. In terms of intelligently and coherently helping out, no way.
That's what bothers me about this whole thing, because at 8 years old, your brain isn't even through growing yet.
Exactly right,
That's
Dr.
exactly
Phil.
right.
So your ability to predict the consequences of your actions, to understand the gravity of your choices, is just simply, I mean, that's a neurological fact. That part of your brain just hasn't grown yet.
In fact, excuse me, that is why we have an entirely different system where there is no jury. The rules of evidence don't really apply the same way as I was saying for juveniles. That's why we have a juvenile system to help juveniles, not just warehouse them somewhere. And this boy, the 8-year-old, is in desperate need of help, and he's not going to get it on his own.
Well, he has a whole support system too. I mean,
what system is that? His parents?
There is a family that does love him. He has 2 grandparents that are very involved in his life.
Well, where were they during all these spankings and during him getting a .22 caliber weapon and ammo? Where were they all the time?
And it's obvious to me, too, that if this kid goes into the system, there's not going to be positives for him on the other side of that. I agree with Paul in the sense that obviously the kid needs to understand what he's done is wrong, and he's going to need to take responsibility for that as much as he can at 8 years old. But developmentally, what you brought up about his brain, he doesn't understand long-term consequences.
Well, this kid has a steep hill in front of him no matter what.
Definitely,
even if he gets the proper care, the proper treatment, whether it's your course, Nancy's course, your course, whatever, he's got to live with the reality.
He has to live with what he's done.
If in fact he is guilty, he has to live with the reality that he killed two people, and that's a heavy burden.
Father. I mean,
That's a heavy burden on anybody. All right, coming up, a murder so brutal even police find it hard to believe that it was a random killing. We'll talk about this when we come back.
Ann Presley, a reporter with KATV Channel 7, was attacked in her home, and police say she was beaten and stabbed.
I found my daughter with every bone in her face broken.
It is with heavy hearts tonight that we tell you KATV's Ann Presley, found beaten in her home Monday morning, died tonight from her injuries.
Nearly 1.5 million violent crimes were committed across the U.S. this past year. 26-year-old Arkansas morning news anchor Ann Presley was just one of the victims. She was brutally attacked in her own home October 20th. Now, Presley's injuries were so severe, she was unrecognizable, even to her own mother.
Ann Presley, a reporter with KATV Channel 7, was attacked in her home, and police say her injuries are life-threatening. Police and a neighbor say they were alerted by Ann's mother.
I found my daughter beyond recognition, with every bone in her face broken, her nose broken, her jaw pulverized so badly that the bone had come out of it.
Police don't have any suspects, a weapon, or a motive to answer why anyone would want to attack Presley.
Anytime somebody's been violated in their own home, definitely it makes us more fearful.
As the sun goes down, everyone holding a light, praying for Ann Presley.
It is with heavy hearts tonight that we tell you KATV's Ann Presley, found beaten in her home Monday morning, died tonight from her injuries.
Police still call it a random robbery.
He could have been a stalker. This monster stole my daughter's innocence.
Well, a suspect has now been arrested for the murder of Ann Presley.
Tonight's top story. Allegations Ann Presley's alleged killer, Curtis Vance, might have attacked another woman.
It was 7 months ago when police say Curtis Vance started his crime spree. His first victim, they say, was raped in her home. DNA evidence left behind. Curtis Vance was called in for a DNA sample. Officers arrested Vance late Wednesday night for Ann Presley's murder.
This is a very, very solid case. It's a result of good detective work.
You're a monster.
Well, it's shocking. I so hate to see that mother and father in pain because of the brutality of the crime. Nancy, does this sound like a random act to you?
Well, to the extent that he obviously watched both of his alleged victims for some time before attacking them, I don't necessarily believe the second attack on Presley was random. It disturbs me that his DNA, the DNA found at the original rape scene a couple of months before, was not put in CODIS, the combined DNA index system. We could have gotten a match much more quickly on Presley. Also, Dr. Phil, when you don't know a horse, take a look at his track record. Apparently, women at a local gym had complained about him, ogling them and stalking them outside the gym. He had been in neighborhoods where he didn't live. There were a lot of red flags of alarm that had been waved, and now we've got one woman raped and another woman murdered and raped.
You know, the thing that bothers me about this, and Dr. Boots, you talk about this some, is that these things don't happen in a vacuum. Oftentimes when somebody murders, they build up to it across time. And to think that these are the only victims, that the two that we know about are the only victims that are out there, it may not be the case.
It's very common that murderers have a very lengthy criminal history prior to the homicidal act. And it's not a surprise then that we see a rape in his past. What is unclear and what I'm not familiar with is what kind of criminal history he does have. But prior criminal history is the best predictor of future criminality, and clearly there's an escalation in his pattern there.
Yeah, and listen, this isn't an isolated event. Up next, we're going to talk about the horrific murder of another newswoman that has some chilling similarities to the killing of Ann Presley.
I'm Jennifer Servo reporting.
I tried calling her. She didn't answer. She's MIA.
As you have probably heard, one of our reporters was found dead at her apartment today.
I get my hopes up that with the right evidence, we get a confession.
The recent murder of Arkansas anchorwoman Ann Presley has been widely compared to the 2002 murder of another up-and-coming newscaster, 22-year-old Jennifer Servo in Abilene, Texas.
Jennifer Servo was a small-town girl with big city dreams.
I'm Jennifer Servo, KRBC 9.
A lot of people say when you come into the news business, you either have it or you don't.
I'm Jennifer Servo reporting.
She landed a job with a small television station in Abilene, Texas.
These men and women of the 39th Airlift Squadron.
In just 8 weeks, Jennifer became a valued member of the KRBC family. So when she didn't respond to a call, her coworkers began to worry.
I tried calling her. She didn't answer, left her voicemails. She's MIA.
After 2 days, it was clear that something was terribly wrong.
As you have probably heard, one of our reporters was found dead at her apartment today.
When we first got in, we noticed the obvious signs that an assault had occurred.
Medical examiner tells us that she had strangulation and the blunt force trauma.
Investigators collected fingerprint, blood, and DNA evidence, but their first lead came from what they didn't find: any sign of a break-in.
Did the evidence collected point to any specific suspect?
No, it did not.
You know, whoever did this is going to tell somebody someday. That's all it's going to take.
I get my hopes up that with the right evidence, we get a confession.
Well, it was a mother's worst nightmare getting the news that her beautiful young daughter had been murdered.
There are 2 sexual predators with addresses on Main Street here in downtown Missoula. I'm Jennifer Servo, KRBC 9.
Jen loved being in front of the camera.
I'm Jennifer Servo reporting.
She was a news reporter. That was the first stop for Jennifer's new career. I started trying to call Jennifer on Monday, her day off. No calls back. I just had a strange feeling. It was about 5 o'clock and the knock on the door. There's a policeman. I had this vision that a policeman came to tell me that Jen was hurt. So when I opened up the door, I said, "It's Jen, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "What's wrong? Is she dead?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am. She was found murdered in her apartment." It's just the worst, the very worst thing. I just couldn't imagine why anybody would kill my daughter.
We'll talk to Jennifer's mother and sister when we come back.
Jennifer and I were very close growing up. We were just always there for each other. When I found out about Jen being murdered, it felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I just was shaking. That feeling didn't go away for a long time. And I miss her every day.
Well, that was Jennifer Servo's sister, Krista. Jennifer was a news anchor who was brutally murdered, much like Ann Presley. Now, Jennifer's mother, Sherry, is also here. What did you think when you heard about this other story?
Oh, it reminded me so much of Jen's murder. Ann was killed in her own home. I immediately felt so sorry for the parents, especially Mom finding her daughter.
And do you have a suspect in Jennifer's murder at this point? Do you have any directions, any leads about it at all?
The police called it a crime of passion, and they feel it's somebody she knew, possibly somebody she worked with or an old boyfriend.
The location of these two towns are not that far apart. You know, we're talking about 200 or 300 miles. Nancy, is it possible that there's a connection here? I mean, they look alike, they're in the same job. the elements of the crime. They were both local newscasters. They were both young, pretty, and blonde, both murdered at home, both brutally bludgeoned, no murder weapons, both sexually assaulted, and no forced entry.
You know, it's definitely possible that the same person is responsible. Now, it's my understanding that at the time of Jennifer Servo's death, she was dating two different guys. Their fingerprints were found in the apartment, but rightfully so. They were questioned and they were never arrested. Apparently, DNA linking the killer to Servo's body was never found.
So they don't have any kind of forensic evidence at this point at all, right?
No.
Well, we're gonna put up a phone number when we come back. So if you got any information about this at all, this is still very much an open case. We still very much want to try and help bring somebody to justice here. We'll be right back. If you or anyone you know has information on Jennifer Servo's case, you can make an anonymous call to the Abilene Crime Stoppers at 1-800-868-8477. I would like to thank Nancy Grace from Headline News. Nancy, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Dr. Phil.
Really appreciate it. Criminologist Dr. Denise Boots from the University of Texas at Dallas, as well as children's rights attorney Paul Mones for being part of today's show. Thank you to all of my guests who shared their personal stories. All right, thanks for being here. So long.